Russ, it's kind of crazy too. I mean, this expedition was 5 years in the making, technically speaking, but we're out here for such a short amount of time. And I think Dee Dee and we talked about this last night during our watch, but that sort of feeling when you do finally discover, what it is you're looking for. And I mean, it's got to be a highlight sort of in your career, right?
Yeah, it will be. When that happens, it certainly will be, and it'll be the realization of a long-held dream and a lot of hard work by a lot of very dedicated and passionate people. So I really hope to feel that thrill of discovery soon. And this is part of the build up to that the anticipation and then the uncertainty is a big part of the payoff, and what makes it all the sweeter when it happens. But that is the nature of exploration. We are seeking the answers, going into the unknown and trying to bring back the truth. So it's a feeling I hope we'll all get to share in the near future.
And you had a great conversation not too long ago with Dr. Ballard. And do you want to maybe sort of touch on a few highlights of for those that missed it?
Yeah. That was really special, and it was almost a overload because to be here on Nautilus and to be in the midst of this expedition that's been so long in the making, and then to have the chance to share it with Dr. Ballard, whose vision it was to put this together, to have the ability to explore the oceans and to share it with the world as we do so, and for it to kind of work in reverse, to literally be in his chair, and I'm staying in his cabin right now as well, and drinking his soda, but yeah, so it was just really something to get to share that with him, and that idea of telepresence enabled exploration, and to be able to bring him out here virtually to join us in the field, and really the reason I say it was almost overload, because not only did we have Dr. Ballard joining us, but as well we had Ed Tripp, who is the chairman of the Pan Am Historical Foundation, as well as the son of Pan Am founder Juan Tripp. So to have the two of them, joining us, for the expedition, from the Inner Space Center at URI, was just incredible, and just trying to decide what to ask, and who to listen to, who do we talk to. I mean, we could have spent the whole time with either one of them, and we had both of them, but they shared great insights and knowledge with us, and played very well off of one another, and it was once we got the conversation going, it was really very gratifying, and yeah, I think one of the highlights, one of the things that stuck out to me was something that Dr. Ballard said about what prompted like the whole idea of creating this telepresence, was that when he returned from the Titanic expedition and found that he'd received 16,000 letters.
Oh my goodness.
Physical letters from people who were so interested in what he had done and what his team had done, and so the ability to make that instantaneous, and the fact that you can look at your screen now and field questions from all over the world in real time. it's always interesting to hear when you periodically read off the list of all of the countries and regions and places that are that people are joining us from.
Yeah. Yeah, the Titanic. I mean, that was I my dad bought me this massive coffee table book of all the photos from Argo at the time, and that was more than 20 years ago, and
Oh
I
yeah.
still, I mean, it totally sparked this idea that it's really possible for anyone to follow this path and get out here, and
Yeah.
so it's really cool. And obviously the Titanic in 1985 was a huge discovery, and it sort of set this new bar for oceanic exploration. Are we, when we look at these sites that we consider as important or worthy of this time and effort and money, of course, how do we determine what takes priority?
Well, I think that's yeah, that's interesting. It's everyone has their area of interest, their area of expertise, and and I think we all pursue it. In my case, it's aviation and maritime history, and that's really what led to the formation of Air Sea Heritage Foundation, and so we can't all do everything all the time. So we do our thing, and we do it as well as we can. And my interest and fell on Samoan Clipper, and it seemed like a great opportunity to tell what is an unknown story, a little known story now, and bring it back to light, and bring it to to the attention of people and share it, and also to share the experience of exploration. Um, and yeah, I mean. It's a question that gets asked a lot, like why bother? Why bother? And I think it's a drive in all of us as human beings, to be curious and to want to know the answers. And I think it's important in this case, in cases of maritime archaeology, aviation archaeology, that it's that human connection that draws us, and the fact that we should care. We should care about what happens to every one of us. It's that same impulse of no one left behind, and I think it's important to us as just as people and human beings to look out for one another and to learn and to determine. In this case, there's still unanswered questions about some really remarkable people who were doing something that benefited all of us. And it's in our duty, if we can, and this is our chosen path, is to follow this. And so if we can go out there and seek those answers and bring them back for the families and the extended family, and just for all of us as human beings, to know that there are people out there who will never give up and will never forget, and will always strive to know and to share and to remember.
Absolutely, and that's, a question that I ask in every interview that I conduct is, why do we care about this? And of course there is this emotional connection, and there is this element of respect, and whatever we find does contribute to sort of this greater scientific knowledge of, how to characterize accidents and maybe how to find them, and using this data to apply it to other events that are similar.
Exactly, and we're learning about about the deep ocean even every second. Right now, you look at that camera screen, and that is a sight no human eye has ever beheld. So we're learning all the time, and of course, we're driving towards one goal, but we're still benefiting other aspects as we go.
What is it about the Samoan Clipper that sparked your interest of all of the potential aircrafts or vessels to explore? Why did this one captivate you?
Well, I came to it, you know, and I'm embarrassed to say, even though I love this stuff, and I didn't really know the story. I had the vaguest notion when Dr. Delgado suggested that I could, you know, assist him in helping suggest targets for exploration in the Eastern Pacific. You know, I was kind of racking my brain, and just at the back of my mind, I recalled something happened to Pan Am's chief pilot, and and you know, started to look into it, and the more I learned, the more fascinated I became. You know, that revealed this story of, you know, how what a remarkable individual, you know, Ed Music had been, and what, you know, what contributions he had made to further aviation, and to, you know, establish it as a going concern and a real industry and a world changing force, um, and you know, just something about you know, that crew, and that you know, they were the elite of the elite, and were you know, pioneers, you know, blazing new trails across, you know, the most daunting routes imaginable, um, and for them to be, you know, taken so suddenly, and then to realize, you know, how good the information was, that it seemed like this is something where, you know, by bringing the
Go ahead,
technology
Rich.
that's available to us today, that was, you know, undreamt of in 1938, but that we have today, and
Roger.
that we knew would someday be in
Yeah.
this area, seemed like this was the time for this one to you know, get involved, and to start the planning and the research to pursue it.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that this is the furthest south and the furthest west that the Nautilus has gone. Is that right?
That's my understanding as well. It's pretty exciting to be at, you know, at the forefront of you know, Nautilus, you know, pushing back the boundaries, and striking out to new areas. You know, they've come a long way. I mean, I think the ship started off in the Black Sea with I think it's some of its first explorations about 11 years ago, and has worked its way, you know, across the globe until it's reached here, and who knows where it'll go next.
Looking sort of in modern history, right? So when at the beginning of the aviation industry, and when airplanes came into the picture, do we have a number of how many shipwrecks versus plane wrecks are in that same time frame? If that makes sense.
I would believe that there would be considerably more shipwrecks based upon the longer time that humans have been sailing and utilizing the water for transportation and commerce, compared to the relatively short lifespan that we have had with airplanes and other flying vehicles. So I'm not sure about the number of airplane sort of wrecks, but there could, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of undiscovered shipwrecks, and that's why the work that Nautilus does is so important. There's a lot of ocean that we have never covered before, so we could find a shipwreck or another type of vessel along our transit or survey routes and not even know it until we come across it.
And this is my first time on the Nautilus, but who in the room has been on an expedition before?
This is my second time out.
Cool. Where did you go the first time?
We were off of California in Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and Channel Islands.
Awesome. little bit colder.
Yep.
It's still good weather.
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Russ, and this is also my second voyage on Nautilus.
Oh, cool. What was your first one?
First time I was the historic aviation specialist for the first investigation of the wreck of USS Independence, which was a World War II era light aircraft carrier that was later used as a atomic bomb target during the Able and Baker tests at Bikini Atoll, and then it actually survived
Oh, wow.
2 nuclear blasts and a little, more bent and burnt and radioactive, but they actually, in the Navy, ended up bringing it back to Hunters Point outside of San Francisco for further study, and they wanted to evaluate different methods for decontaminating vessels that had been irradiated, and they ran a school as well, utilizing it until about 1951, and then decided to dispose of the ship by scuttling. And it just so happened that they chose what became the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, and then NOAA did some mapping in the area and imaged a target that looked the right size and the right space, right place. And so I think that was about 2009, and then during the workshop on identifying targets in the Eastern Pacific that was hosted by Ocean Exploration Trust and NOAA, that was one of the targets that Dr. Delgado had proposed, was an investigation of USS Independence, and the opportunity came in August of 2016. And where Nautilus deployed Argus and Hercules and on the wreck, and so I got to sit actually in Suna's chair and observe and contribute to that first investigation. The first time eyes had been laid on the wreck of Independence in some 65 years, and probably the coolest thing, at least for me, in that very cool experience was finding a plane wreck inside a shipwreck. So there was a Grumman F6F Hellcat night fighter that was had fallen into the forward elevator shaft and was resting at the bottom, and we were able to maneuver Hercules in to get a closer look.
Wow, that's a surprise.
Yeah, yeah.
And Suna, you've been on a few expeditions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I first started in 2010, and I got on in one of the coasts of Turkey, the southern coast. And I believe the first expedition was on the hydrothermal vents in the Anaximander seamount off of the southern coast of Turkey, Antalya. Yeah, and I've been coming out ever since.
It's hard to leave.
Yeah.
I'm Trevor. This is my 23rd cruise, I believe. I started in
Wow.
2016 on Shakedown. That's where we tested all the equipment at the start of every year. We do a shakedown cruise, and that was my first.
What was the most memorable cruise that you've been on?
This one.
Really?
The most recent.
Yeah, yeah. It's the freshest in your memory.
Freshest in my memory. No, the real answer is I like the ones around off the coast of Vancouver Island where we do the hot fence. It's just so much fun to
Oh, yeah.
see those fly around there and look at the amazing geology and amazing way the world works. It's really cool.
It's cool to see, too, what things people remember and what people connect with the most. Some it's hydrothermal features or geological features. Some it's animals and googly-eyed squid.
I just like the ones that are fun to fly around in.
Yeah.
All the tangly, complicated features. That's what I like.
Right. So, I mean, you guys are flying over there. I think it's easy to forget that we're not simply just towing something behind the boat, but there's a lot of strategy behind what you do and how you operate the ROVs.
Yeah, it's definitely a team operation. That's why there's 3 of us up front here. 2 pilots in the nav for that, for the navigation and understanding what's going on around us is very essential to have more than 1 and more than 2 sets of eyes on all that kind of stuff. And then combining with the rest of the team to get fantastic imagery with all the video team and then all the science and information on the back row. It's all huge teamwork, and it's essential to work together on all this kind of stuff because it couldn't be done alone.
Yeah. And, you know, some missions, not on the Nautilus, but otherwise use autonomous operated vehicles, right? AOVs. And what are some of the differences between those and the ROVs, and how, you know, might an ROV be better or different?
Yeah, AUVs can't, or almost generally never give real-time information back to the ship. They're assigned a task, they're sent out to sea and do their thing and come back. So you don't get real-time feedback of, oh, this looks like something good to sample, or let's get a close-up on this, zoom in, or whatever like that. It just kind of does its task, comes back, and then you analyze the data later and determine whether something deserves a second visit. Whereas now we not only get it real-time to the ship, but also even to shore. Really cool.
Also with the AUVs, battery life is the big issue. With an ROV, since you're connected to the ship, you also have power, but once you send something untethered, it's up to the battery life of the vehicle as well.
And can an AUV go to the same depths as the dual ROV system? In theory?
I know they can go thousands of meters, so roughly the magnitude of what we can go to as well.
Cool. Allison, we were just going around and talking about how many expeditions everyone's been on, and you have a few, right?
Yeah, hi everybody, Allison here. On Nautilus, I don't know. I think over 25. I know total, and I'm over 50 total.
Well,
Yep.
do you have one that sort of stands out as most memorable?
Probably my first one. That's what got me hooked. You know, it's the first time I went to sea. It was I really fell in love with the interdisciplinary nature of seagoing research and just the kind of small community that happens on a ship. So, yeah, probably that first one that was the most memorable. It was life-changing.
Wow. That seems to be a common thread.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so for those of you maybe just popping in, we are still conducting side scan sonar of the ocean floor looking for the Samoan Clipper, which was an S-42B aircraft downed in 1938. Russ, the Samoan Clipper itself was, at this point in time, just a cargo plane. So it had, you know, over 750 pounds of cargo and mail. Did any of the S-42 aircrafts carry commercial passengers, or was that, you know, a long-term goal to eventually get to?
Yes, the standard S-42 was equipped to carry passengers. It was standard configuration was for 32 passengers, eight per 4 compartments with seating for 8, and double rows of 2 seats that would face each other, opposite of the a window, and there was a galley on board and a steward to serve passengers meals and snacks in flight, tea service and all like very finely appointed with described in company literature as an air yacht. And there were different configurations. There could be a sleeper configuration as well for overnight flights. That would be familiar to people at the time traveling by, like, say, Pullman railroad car. So yes, so the I think they were used for passenger flights. They were used mainly in the Latin American routes. The first S-42 was actually named Brazilian Clipper, and made the flights down, like flying down to Rio is that's where that old expression comes from, is from the Pan American service, and Samoan Clipper at one point in its career, it started, it was delivered in November of 1936 as the first of the B models, modified for longer, extended flights, and to make survey routes and do these inaugural mail runs, and in March and April of 1937, it made the first survey flight with music at the controls down to Auckland in New Zealand and back. Though the plane was then assigned to go over to Manila, and it was based there in Manila, and provided a shuttle service to Macau and on to Hong Kong, and was renamed Hong Kong Clipper. In fact, its first name when it was originally delivered was Pan American Clipper 2, and then Hong Kong Clipper, and then when they decided to inaugurate the mail run to New Zealand at the end of 1937, it was brought back and reconfigured as a survey ship, and assigned for that flight. So, but because they were making these much longer distance legs on the flight to New Zealand, they would not have the room to accommodate passengers. They had to install extra fuel tanks inside the hull of the airplane, and which would not have been, it was not considered safe for passengers, and also there just really wouldn't be much room left over for passengers on those flights anyway. And so yes, so when it left Pongo Pongo on the morning of January 11th, 1938, they were carrying 751 pounds of express air cargo. Mostly letters and what they call first day covers, kind of commemorative envelopes and stamps, and signed by members of the crew, and then found a few newspaper articles that in the New Zealand papers that talk about items that they are anticipating will arrive on the first flight, first airmail to deliver, to their country, and some of the items include a new radio, a typewriter, and the newsreel footage of the sinking of the gunboat USS Panay in China during the siege of Nanking in December of 1937. So those 3 reels are supposed to have been on board, and maybe are still down there as well.
Wow, wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
And on that note, I mean, what, based on other aircrafts that have maybe been discovered or recovered, what are we kind of anticipating the potential for finding?
Well, we're hoping, based on some exciting recent finds, not only there was the airplane that was found, by Nautilus on board the Independence, that was in remarkable condition. You could see the the aluminum was still very sound, and you could see the national insignia on the wing. That's the first thing we spotted when Hercules dropped down for a look, was the stars and bars, the white national insignia on a blue wing that was broken off and leaning against the far bulkhead. And then in slightly deeper water, there was a Air France Lockheed Constellation airliner that ditched in the Mediterranean, that was discovered recently by the Turkish Navy, where you could still read the Air France logo on the side of the airplane. And probably most exciting of all was in March of 2018, when the crew of the research vessel Petrel discovered the resting place of the USS Lexington, an American aircraft carrier sunk in the Battle of the Coral Sea in May of 1942. And several of the planes in the air group were arrayed, still spotted on the flight deck when the ship went down, and floated free and sank in the debris field around the wreck. And some of them were in remarkable state of preservation. Specifically, there was 7 very rare Douglas TBD-1 Devastator torpedo bombers, where they look almost as if they were deposited there the day before, where you could see the paintwork was bright and unblemished, and you could see the national insignia, in the very distinctive early war star and ball, where you have a blue circle with a white star and a red ball in the center, and then the fuselage codes, like 2T1, which would be for Air Group 2 and the torpedo squadron T, and then the final number would be the individual airplane in that squadron. And so there were any number, well, 7 of them to be precise, in the debris field, and where you could see the squadron markings and the Bureau of Aeronautics number on the tail, in some cases, which was remarkable in the fact that the doped fabric covering on the control surfaces was still present, and still bearing this very distinctive 13 red and white stripes, just like the American flag down the back of the tail of the airplane. So to see that, it was astonishing, and it makes you optimistic about the chances that those sort of conditions might prevail here as well. I mean, the depth of water is virtually the same, and the length of time. I mean, the Lexington went down only just over 4 years after the loss of Samoan Clipper. So you have comparable aircraft and construction materials and that have been at the same depths in southern Pacific waters for a similar amount of time. So it does make you optimistic and to imagine what the state of preservation of the remains of Samoan Clipper could be, because they've lain there for 81 years undisturbed, and freezing that moment for all time, and it would be really something to reconnect with it, and to visit it and see what we can learn about the events of that day.
Yeah, and you mentioned these reels that maybe have been on the aircraft. Is it possible that some of the mail would still be intact as well?
It's possible. I mean, there was a shipwreck that was discovered off of England. I think the Garasopa, that was sunk in World War II, and there was a salvage company out there that I think they were bringing up. There was a cargo of silver. But one of the things they also retrieved was a sack of what turned out to be Royal Mail, and and I think perhaps because it was contained in this heavier canvas bag and had been perhaps sheltered inside the wreck and at deep depth and very cold waters, and the paper letters had survived and have been conserved and are perfectly legible, and I believe they were acquired and a number of them put on display in the Royal Mail Museum in England. So it does make you wonder, could some of that similar conditions prevail here, and could there be a chance that the cargo of Samoan clippers survived? And my understanding is that they would have stored the mail in the very aft end of the plane, in the tail section, which would have been the furthest from the detonation and the explosion that brought down the airplane. And looking at the drawings and construction plans for the aircraft, the layout in the interior, there were doors between the individual compartments. And I don't know this for certain, but I imagine it would be a wise precaution to close those doors in preparation for landing. That they would help make the airplane stay watertight if in the event of any kind of incident during landing. So could that have also shielded those after portions of the plane and taken some of the brunt and deflected some of the force of that explosion that brought it down, and that maybe that tail section has separated intact, and some of its cargo could still survive, along with the other components of the airplane and other artifacts.
Wow, how incredible would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Clipper was headed from, or Samoan Clipper was headed from Honolulu to Auckland, New Zealand.
Yes, okay. Their route. So the mail actually had originated in Alameda or San Francisco, and had been transported to Honolulu and then transferred to Samoan Clipper, just by one of the other aircraft in the Pan American fleet. And so Musick and his crew departed from Honolulu, and on January 9th, and made their way down to Kingman Reef, and were refueled and serviced by a crew on a specially chartered ship that was standing by, and then flew on from there on the 10th down to Pongo Pongo in American Samoa, where there was a Pan Am base had been constructed, and a dock where they could tie up and again service and fuel the airplane and provision, and then continue on their way on what was to be intended to be an 1,800-mile flight to Auckland, New Zealand, to deliver the mail.
I mean, and so that kind of brings this idea that aviation is a little bit like the internet in our day. Not only did it start sort of this rapid transit of people, but also it made communication so much more accessible and quick. Yeah,
I've actually had that same thought myself, that the connection between people, the kind of the shrinking of the world and bringing people closer together, through air travel, that we didn't see another leap forward like that, and really until the invention of the internet. Yeah, so it's great to look back and see that progress.
And as we're continuing this side scan sonar search, we have identified 43 potential targets that give off a little bit more of an image that looks like it could be something that was human-made, as opposed to something that is more naturally occurring. So that is looking for these straighter lines, right angles, which is exciting. And we'll continue this sort of lawnmower pattern, and then after the team meets and goes over and compiles the data, we'll identify a few different locations that Argus will drop down to and get a better idea of what we're looking at with the video feed. And then going from there, we'll incorporate Hercules back into the picture, and the two of them will do a more in-depth sort of visualization of what it is those targets are. And Dee Dee, when we're looking at this sonar data, so the side scan sonar measures out about 100 meters or so from the side, from side to side, and then Argus is filling in that central gap. How big is Argus, and does that sort of, and its view, and how does that sort of add to this overall picture that we're getting?
Yeah, we are lucky enough to have Argus not only outfitted with the side scan sonar, but the camera system that you see in the top right corner. This has an eyeball right under, that's giving us an eyeball view right under the toefish, or Argus, showing us the bottom. So right now it's pretty devoid of anything. It's muddy and relatively flat, but it'll show us passing over large rocks and large geologic features, and this really is an added bonus to be able to cover that blind spot that is right under Argus that with the side scan sonar transducers do not cover. So we're getting 2 for 1 on this one.
And in those cases that, we're not lucky enough to have Argus right down the center filling in that gap, is there a way to compensate for that, or do you just sort of hope that whatever you're looking for isn't in that area?
There's definitely a way to compensate for that. You schedule or organize your lines slightly closer together so that they have overlap, and you can gain that coverage that you're missing in the center. We can push our line spacing a little bit for this, knowing that we have video coverage of that area in between. So, there are ways for most of these surveys we don't have the camera, so you just plan them with a little tighter line spacing to cover that gap on your next subsequent line.
And then the survey area that we're looking at is in that bottom left quadrant, the chart. And it's about 2 square miles, maybe a little bit more than 5 kilometers squared. Is this sort of a normal sized survey range? Is it different based on the amount of time or depth or, all of the logistics that go into the expedition? How do you determine exactly what area to cover?
So this can vary widely based upon the water depth and, what you're looking for. And, the different line spacing varies how many lines you have, how long they are, how many you do. So it's definitely sort of different for each survey based upon the conditions and what you're trying to look for. So it's up to the navigation team and the chief scientist to sit down and figure out what the most appropriate survey area and line spacing is for that particular project.
And how much time goes into determining sort of the survey area? I mean, it's not like you just sit down the night before and say, hey, that looks good.
Well, you try to look at all of the historical information available for how big of an area you might need to look for. Any accounts of locational information obviously is very, very important to have a center point as your main area, and then plan that larger survey area around that so that you're giving extra coverage. But it is relatively easy with software programs today to add an extra line or to extend a line to add a little more coverage. That's why all of these programs are so efficient and so important to the work that's being done, and amazing navigators who know how to use the software.
Yeah, lucky us.
Yes, yes, excellent. No complaints.
Yeah.
Only positive. And the crew up in the bridge who are excellent pilots and navigators. So it takes a team effort to keep the vessel and Argus on track.
It really does. And I mean, so when we're looking at, these potential targets, the credit goes to the entire team, right? Not one person gets to say, that was found on my watch, so I discovered it.
Surely, yes. It's a whole ship and all of the support people ashore. So it's not just on board, it's a much greater network than that.
And in you know, jumping back sort of in compiling this survey area and determining where to look, what information did we turn to and how did we know, you know, this was the spot that is the most likely resting place of the Samoan clipper?
I don't know if Russ might be the better one to go into the different historical accounts of the incident.
Yeah, we, you know, our primary source has been the Bureau of Air Commerce accident report that was released in April of 1938, and they, of course, were working from all of the available evidence that had been gathered at the time. They had all the reports from, you know, from the Navy search and the eyewitness accounts, and also the physical you know, debris that had been collected, you know, at the accident site, and they could, you know, interview the people that that had participated and had serviced the plane and who had witnessed, you know, its departure, and so we really start from there, and it took Lonnie Shore quite a bit of searching 5 years ago to track down a copy of it in the ultimately in the files of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Though today, some helpful soul has now posted it to Wikipedia, so you can find it on the internet and read it in its entirety. And then yeah, we also went back and got a lot of those source materials as well. You know, Lonnie also at the National Archives photographed the relevant pages from the log of USS Avocet, which was the Navy ship that conducted the initial search for Samoan Clipper, and then at the University of Miami Library, they have preserved the records and archives of Pan American Airways, and which include all of the original correspondence and radiograms that were exchanged in the wake of the tragedy, and as people tried to piece together what had happened and come to grips with the whole loss of the plane and its crew. But there are, you know, preserved within there are you know, accounts of the witness statement as well, and also the reports of the naval aviator and the captain of the Avocet who overflew the site, you know, within hours of the loss of the airplane.
And looking over this, the Bureau of Air Commerce accident report, they did provide, you know, crash coordinates or maybe what they believe to be the location of the incident. Have we passed over that area yet?
Yeah, I think we went over it yesterday at some point, but it's hard to keep track of time.
It is
here in our dark cube, but yeah, yeah, sometime you know, early in our operations yesterday, we've passed over the exact coordinates that were given. But I don't think anybody here reasonably expected that we would find it exactly, precisely, you know, where it was estimated, because even then, you know, the searchers at the time were working off of what was visible on the surface. So it's a you know, it puts us in the neighborhood, and we know that it has to be close by to where they estimated, but it was, you know, unless we were very, 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 very lucky, it was not going to be exactly where they said. And even so, you know, some of the interesting targets that we want to investigate are not that far from that estimated position. So we have those marked, and we'll analyze them further and decide if we want to follow up and get a closer look with the Argus camera. But in the meantime, we're just continuing to get the overall picture of the immediate vicinity of that report. You know, there's a lot of things that could act on what they saw, even though they were there, you know, within hours. You know, we have no idea what was happening below the surface. You know, what currents might have acted on the fuel and debris that was rising, you know, from the wreck, you know, how it was affected in its journey, you know, through the water column, which is, you know, nearly 2 miles, you know, deep. So, but we do have to figure that it's somewhere nearby.
Just to even have coordinates is special. That's unusual. So to have that is a huge bonus in planning for this. So we don't take that lightly. That there, you know, was a Navy vessel out there. There was a large effort to locate this, and we do have some coordinates to go along with that.
Yeah, a lot of times, you know, investigating historic aircraft, you know, that are unfound, you know, a lot of times that they're just gone, completely vanished with no information, nothing, hardly anything to go on where to look. So, and the list is long. You know, there's, you know, Charles Ullman, Charles Kingsford Smith, and Amelia Earhart, and Flight 19, and you know, all the way to MH370. You know, where you have just vast swaths of you know, area to cover if you were ever to hope to find anything. And so we are very fortunate in the work that was done, you know, 81 years ago to try and find the answers. And they were close, and they wanted so desperately to you know, conclude that investigation. They wanted to, in their words, you know, exhaust every possibility to recover the airplane and the remains of the crew. But it proved to be just out of their reach. You know, they knew they were close, they knew they were in the area, but there was nothing, you know, no diver even today could possibly reach those depths, no free swimming diver. And you know, they considered dragging, you know, with grappling hooks at the end of lines to try and snag the wreck and pull it to the surface. But that was quickly dismissed as well, because they calculated that the length of every piece of line that they had available at the naval station in Pongo Pongo, if they spliced it together, it would reach to 3,000 feet. And they had estimated the water depth here at 1,000 fathoms, or 6,000 feet. And as we now know, it's more on the order of 9,000 to 10,000 feet. It's 3,000 meters. So it was always going to be, you know, out of their grasp and beyond the reach of anything even conceivable in 1938. But today that technology exists, and it is here now on this ship, and is down in the depths looking for answers.
Right, and that technology that you speak of is the side scan sonar. So for those of you who are wondering what we're doing, side scan sonar is attached to Argus, and Argus is hovering just above the seafloor at a depth of around 3,000 meters, taking measurements, and we're looking for any sort of object in that sonar in that top left screen that looks to be something that might resemble an aircraft or otherwise some sort of man-made object. So really looking for bright yellow shadows surrounding it, hard lines, right angles, and then as those appear and as those come up, our team is logging it, and later, once we finish sort of getting this overall lawnmower pattern finished, the team will go in and compile the data and analyze it and decide which of those potential targets are highest priority. We'll send Argus down with just the camera to get a better look, and then Hercules will eventually join Argus so that we can do a more in-depth look and analysis of what it is we're looking for. And what that is the Samoan Clipper, an S-42B aircraft that was downed in January of 1938. And so far we've identified 43 targets. Of those 43 targets, Dee and Russ, what look to be the most promising?
I think we probably have a handful of them, maybe a half a dozen, I think, that are on the high priority list at this point. you know, I think it's going to be important to have Argus go over some of these targets to give a better feel, you know, maybe early on, and then we can reassess to see if we are marking biology or geology, excuse me, instead of possible Simone Clipper related debris. It's always better to mark more targets than less targets, so we will probably rule out a lot of the targets that we marked early on, just as we were getting acquainted with what the seafloor looks like. But we do have you know, a handful that are more promising, and I think are on the list for further investigation once we are finished with the survey area.
Great. And do we have sort of a time frame, you know, just in terms of when we'll send Argus back down to visually get an idea of what we're looking at, and then at which point we'll send Hercules as well?
I believe we're going to finish the survey lines in the southern portion of our area, so we are on line 5 right now, so finish out the remaining 4 lines and then transit back up north, passing by some of the targets that we had previously marked to finish the northern survey lines. So we're going to be at this probably at least for the next day, probably maybe tomorrow morning when we're going to finish up our survey area. So we got a little way to go, but everything looks really good data-wise, and I think we're gathering the best data that we can.
Yeah, I think it's probably sometime, you know, later this afternoon or evening, our time, that we would be transiting to the north and would aim to pass over a couple of these targets and get a visual on them and determine, you know, whether or not they're natural or man-made. And so that's the best estimate we can give you right now. It's probably going to be, you know, I would unfortunately probably very late for people watching, at least in the United States. You know, but you know, just if you're really interested, you know, tune in,
Yeah.
and you can see, you know, and you'll get a sense of what it's like to stand watch as well. You know, go ahead and wake up, you know, after a few hours and get your coffee and sit in a dark room, like turn off all the lights and,
Yeah.
and rock back and forth and
That's
turn
totally
up your air
true.
conditioning full blast, and you'll be here.
Yeah, so that's, you know, that's a fair point, is just sort of looking at how the control van operates. There are 3 different crews, and we all take turns, each manning a 4-hour shift and getting 8 hours off, and then coming back for 4 hours, ideally, right? Some of us end up being here a little bit more than that. And Russ, when you say, you know, passing over these targets in the northern section to get a visual, that at that point, that's when we'll be sending Argus down with the camera directly over those targeted points. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, we won't necessarily be sending. I mean, it's already down there.
Or down,
right? So
down.
it'll stay down, and we'll just utilize the downward-looking camera that is on Argus. Which right now is, you know, not showing us a whole lot. But yeah, we'll get it down close to the seabed and run the vehicle directly over those targets, so that we'll get a good visual, and it should be fairly obvious, you know, whether or not we're looking at something natural or man-made. And frankly, like if we see aircraft wreckage, then yes, it would probably at that time, you know, we would certainly at that time bring up Argus and reintegrate Hercules and conduct a more thorough investigation. You know, at this point, there's you know, there's no reason to think there's any other aircraft out here besides Simone Clipper. So if we cite you know, aluminum aircraft structures on the bottom, then we'll know we're in the right place.
And it looks like we're still seeing that sort of muddy bottom.